and welcome to Positive Vibes from the Valley. I'm your host, Ryan, and I work for the Northwestern Prevention Collaborative as the Community Liaison and Training Coordinator. This podcast focuses on SAMHSA's 8 dimensions of wellness: emotional, spiritual, intellectual, physical, environmental, financial, occupational, and social. So today we're talking about physical wellness, and we invited Mr. George Reid to come onto our show and talk a little bit more about that. Thank you for being here today, George.
Yeah, I really appreciate you having me.
Yeah, man, I'm really glad you were able to come on and talk a little bit about physical wellness. So first things first, I'm going to give you the definition of physical wellness. Then we're going to talk a little bit about you and why you're talking about physical wellness. So physical wellness is pretty straightforward with regards to the other dimensions. So SAMHSA gives the definition. It says a healthy body, good physical health habits, nutrition, exercise, and appropriate health care. These make up the physical dimensions of wellness. Well, it's pretty straightforward and pretty simplistic. So really quick, George, just so for our listeners kind of joining us, you're the director of the local wellness center here. I know you have a large educational background in physiology and exercise. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit more about that, more about your background, and maybe a little bit more about your experience and the work you've done?
Sure. So briefly, I've been in the fitness and wellness industry for about 20 years. I was turned on to it late in high school, where I found myself as kind of an overweight teenager, looking to find ways to feel better about myself. And I found movement, I found exercise, and really, really loved it. From there, I joined the military and, kind of used fitness as like a platform to kind of get ready for boot camp and basic training. And then, that sort of solidified what I wanted to do. I kind of realized, like, as much as I appreciated being in the Army, I really didn't want to do that for my career. But I loved exercise and I wanted to do something with that. So I went to James Madison University to study kinesiology. And I did that for 4 years. And right out of college, I got a job as a personal trainer, working the fitness floor at the wellness center. Spent many, obviously I'm still in my 18-year career there, did, group fitness, personal training, working with clients pretty much my entire career. While I was doing that, I went back and got my master's degree from James Madison University. I sort of discovered after that how much I really just sort of enjoyed nerding out on fitness and wellness topics, and later became an adjunct professor with James Madison University. Still do that to this day, where I teach college students how to engage in healthy physical activity, healthy movement, as among other things. So I really love the teaching aspect of it. Obviously, how I met you were a new trainer at the wellness center, and I was assisting you at, like, giving you a base level of knowledge to help you be a successful personal trainer in our industry. So I really love the teaching part. I really love what movement and health can do for you, seeing that not only personally, but in many lives, in many different capacities through my 20-year career. So you've heard me blab on about this stuff for long enough to decide, like, oh, well, he could probably fill a podcast with some of this information. So, but I do appreciate you having me on to talk about it.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things, and it kind of leads to our next question. And you taught me a lot, definitely, when I first came on, and I knew that you would be a great fit for the show because of that teaching aspect. One of the biggest things that we try to do, and that we found that people respond the best to, rather than being, sold something or being advertised or being quote unquote convinced, people like to be educated and then make their own decision. Right. And youth actually show that time and time again. So keeping with that, and George, with your different experience, what does it mean to you to be considered physically well? What is that? Do they come give you a trophy? Do you wear a belt or a plaque above your office door there that says, hey, physically well? What's that look like?
Yeah, that's one of the things that are, I think there's segments of the fitness culture that have done that pretty well. Because you're right. What does that mean, right? You have in elementary education, you have the physical fitness standards, which consist of several tests that determine whether or not you're fit or not. And, through my college education, we have like sort of the upper level equivalent to that, which is like the American College of Sports Medicine, right? How strong are you? How's your cardiovascular fitness, right? But I think the gaping hole in all of that is nobody really looks at you as a human, right? One thing we all have in common is we all have like a movement, right? We don't, but we never, until probably 20 years, 25 years ago, we never established like a movement baseline, right? We have baselines for blood pressure, for height and weight, even we have these physical fitness standards, but yet you may bring a compromised movement to those physical fitness standards, and then you're just pouring fitness onto, what people in our field might say like dysfunction, right? You're not putting fitness on like a good base, or you're not building your house on a firm foundation. So I think the movement piece and taking everybody through that and getting appreciation for how well they move so that they're moving well before they start moving often. So to me, in order to be, physically fit, you have to be able to move well, right? It's moving pain-free, right? I think we've sort of like arrived at a place where pain is normal, right? But pain's never been normal, right? Pain is our warning light on our dashboard, right? We wouldn't say that it's normal for our check engine light to be on, right? That's what pain is. Pain is our check engine light saying, hey, something's not right in your body, but yet we've medicated it. We've worked around it. Like, oh, I just don't run because my knees hurt, my ankles hurt, right? But you should be able to move. You should be able to run, right? You should be able to do things you enjoy. But I think we've got some of that backwards. So really establishing that healthy movement baseline before we engage in what I think, unfortunately, what we get first, right? Which is that physical fitness test. How many pull-ups can you do, right? And, I was the fat kid, right? So I was like, oh, I can't do any pull-ups. I'm watching Ryan do like 100 and I'm like, I can't do that, right? So I'm not physically fit at all, right? And I think that can be more discouraging than looking at like fundamental basic movement patterns and like, can you clear those? And then now let's work on getting you a pull-up because you're going to do it safer and better and you're going to appreciate it more.
That's really interesting that you bring that up because it's kind of a common theme I see in all of these dimensions. And of course, I have a particular vested interest in physical wellness, but is that idea of returning to simplicity, hey, keep it simple and starting, like you said, hey, start at that simple, basic movement level and build from there, and you've kind of already touched on our next question about, with misinformation that swirls out there. And like you were saying, with different standards, it's interesting. There's different standards, at collegiate tests. The Army has a different physical fitness test. They just came out with another new one. So, it sounds like that plaque that we're waiting to get, that physically well plaque, it is a work in progress.
Yeah.
And I guess the question that I have for you regarding that would be, with that misinformation out there kind of swirling around, and physical fitness is kind of a fad almost even lately in some ways. What do you think primarily we get wrong about physical health or wellness, and how do we start to fix that?
Yeah, and everything works, if we think about the pendulum principle, right? Everything kind of works in that pendulum principle. And right now we have undulated way over here to extreme fitness, right? The CrossFit games, and even CrossFit gyms, it's just, extreme, push your body to the max all the time, right? And when we've done that, when the pendulum has swung over here, and I'm not saying there's anything bad or wrong with those things. I think we are in a time where quantity is more important than quality, right? You see it in every physical fitness metric, right? So I'll use the CrossFit, for example, right? When you go in there to work out, it's about how many repetitions, how much can you do, period, right? And when we think about ACSM, American College of Sports Medicine, right, it's how many crunches you can do, how much pounds you can push on the leg press. It's all about quantity, right? It doesn't say anything about doing it right. I think sometimes that's implied, but it's not. It's like you shouldn't gloss over that very important fact, because people are going to miss it, right? Because if I tell you to do, 100 of anything, you're going to like dominate it, no matter what it looks like. And then it starts with our kids, right? It's how many pull-ups you can do, how long you can hang, how fast you can run a mile. Again, it's quantity, quantity, quantity. But we've forsaken the quality, which was over here on this side, and the pendulum has gone all the way to quantity. So I think it'd be nice to sort of land in the middle, right, where we have some qualitative metrics around that, right? Like, we could make fitness a lot better by cleaning up and ensuring that everybody can do things in a quality way, and stop pushing them towards the maximum, right? We're starting to see a little bit of a shift because of that, right? We're overloading the human body system so much. All that we can think about is recovery, right? And I was listening to some guys talk the other day, and they're like, if you have to spend time thinking about your recovery, you're really doing this wrong, right? Because movement should be restorative. Movement should actually be life-giving, and not like, I couldn't move the next day. But we've sort of, again, we kind of lived over here. So we've got to kind of find that middle ground, right? I don't want to go all the way over here where we're just, everything is about like moving this absolute perfection, right? Because perfection, especially if you remember your spiritual wellness, perfection this side of the heaven doesn't exist. But I do think we should sort of strive where we have, a standard for movement, which, the folks at the Functional Movement System have given us simple tests that anybody can do, that will help us kind of gauge where we are in terms of movement, and then working from there and building upon that, right? We're even seeing research now where we're focusing on like the minimal effective dose, right? Because right now I think we're like, oh, well, if I'm not at the gym for an hour and a half, I didn't really work out today, right? Or if I didn't do all these things. And then on the flip side, we're doing studies where we're looking at like, okay, you do like, 10 minutes of exercise a day, right? And we're seeing very similar health benefits to working out for an hour and a half when you're doing like a 10-minute bout, right? So it's like, okay, but we're having like, within this, we're also see where orthopedics has now eclipsed cardiovascular disease and, other metabolic conditions in terms of the cost, right? That our healthcare system is spending. So we have like two leading killers, right? Cancer and cardiovascular disease, that are being eclipsed by orthopedic cost, because we're just beating the crud out of ourselves, right? It's crazy.
That's really interesting. And it's an interesting thing that you're saying. Again, another thing that we talk about all the time is finding balance. So we talk about finding balance within like how the dimensions interact with one another. With your physical wellness and your spiritual wellness, and obviously the other 6 dimensions. If one is underdeveloped, you're going to feel that there's going to be some issues. And when we start to look at the individual dimensions, you can dive in and start to see those imbalances. And with physical wellness, I definitely agree with you. I think there's this idea, that, like you said, pain and discomfort now is the ultimate goal. How much pain can I endure? How much discomfort can I endure? And while pain and discomfort can be a part of growth in all dimensions, like you said, it shouldn't be, the overall thing that movement should feel good. You should leave feeling better, not worse. Right. And that's simple. So I think you're right. I think by trying to get back to that idea of, hey, it's not about how much you're doing, but how well you're doing it, type of idea. I love your contrast there between quantity and quality. That's a great example that I think we could apply to a lot of things. So, well, I think the other thing too, just to kind of add a little more to that thought about, and kind of segueing into the next question, when we get things wrong in this particular dimension, I think it can result in injury. It can definitely manifest itself in a lot of different ways. So why do you think physical wellness is important, not just to the individual, but think of bigger picture. So think of the bigger picture, think of the community. Why do you think physical wellness is important to the community overall?
I mean, I think we're coming out of a COVID year, right? Where I think our focus on health and wellness should have been magnified, right? Because COVID was impacting large, it was COVID plus my heart condition, COVID plus my obesity, COVID plus my diabetes. That was unfortunately ending in not a good situation for a lot of folks, right? And I don't think I heard enough like the importance of wellness and exercise, right? Again, we had largely preventable risk factors being just sort of like, magnified with COVID and ending in either really, really sick individuals or, potentially fatal with that. So, I think if I were to like replay this, right, if I were to look back and, if I were to sort of be leading the charge, I would be leading the charge like, hey, like, let's use this as an opportunity to see like kind of some of our mistakes from the past where we really didn't have a physically well culture for the most part. I mean, obesity is still, a problem. Like, are these diseases that we're suffering from are still a problem that are a direct result of inactivity. So think about how it impacts the community. I think I would replay that and have, this wellness thing be sort of magnified, right? So let's not relive this. Let's be healthy, right? Not to say that healthy people weren't impacted negatively, but it was an insanely much smaller percentage, almost not even existent, right? We heard about it. It's almost if it was normalized, but it really, when you look at the numbers, it wasn't the norm, right? So I would hope that we would all have gotten through this and said, like, we need to make a new commitment to be healthy, right? And the old saying, sweat together, stay together, working at one gym for 18 years, right? I've seen that in many of our segments of our population where it's a group of people who not related, but they just come to the gym and they have like such tight bonds, right? Like family through that physical culture, right? Through being engaged in this activity together, right? And you've seen it even in like, if you think about, those, maybe those workplace challenges that you had to do where you're engaged in something physical together, and then how instantly all of a sudden like your team like wants to give hugs, right? But before they were like, they were given like fingers, right? Not this one here, right? Either. They were just, but instantly they embrace, right? So I think there's something magical about that, engaging in that activity that does draw people together in kind of a really cool way. I don't know if that quite answers your question, so maybe you can kind of lead me where I've left a gap in there.
Well, actually, I think you really hit the nail on the head there. And one of my favorite things that I've seen, and this is where the differentiation between physical wellness and then fad fitness really begins to show itself. And I'm thinking specifically about the wellness center where, I see different populations from different ages, different backgrounds, different cultures. And like you said, they come in and they're total strangers. And by the end of one group class, they're high-fiving, knuckle bumping. It's like, wow, we've cultivated this connection just through a little sweat here, just through struggling together. And it's really neat to see that come together. And I do think, physical wellness plays a large role in our community, like you were saying, and it was specifically highlighted this past year or past year and a half during the pandemic. But really, we should see the importance of having a healthier community, right? I mean, from every standpoint, financially, overall life satisfaction, quality of living in that town. I mean, by cultivating our physical wellness, you are directly improving the community. So speaking of cultivating physical wellness, so we have you here, George, big bad director of the Wellness Center, multiple experiences with regards to training, with education. But what do you do? what do you do to balance your own physical wellness? I know you're a busy guy. You've got family, you're a boss. How do you find time? What do you do? And really quick, what have you learned, I guess, about your journey through physical wellness?
Okay. So I think I learned a lot early on. Like I kind of mentioned, like I was that overweight teenager, right? And this kind of goes back to why I even decided to do the career path that I went on. So I kind of got into health and exercise, and I was the quantity guy, right? So it was all about more, right? The only thing I wasn't doing more of was eating, right? So I was like kind of like borderline like eating disorder, over exerciser, all for the sake of like, this aesthetic goal, right? And I feel like I did everything that you could possibly do wrong. From a actual physical health standpoint, right? Because when you think about like eating disorders and, losing a lot of weight, like those things just weren't really healthy. I wasn't doing things smart. So that's what sort of drove me to start this career, right? I wanted to teach people how to do this in a way that didn't cause harm. I'm kind of a little bit about me. So as a dyslexic individual, one thing I've learned about individuals with dyslexia is they often like capture the bigger picture better than they do the individual parts, right? So in college, you study the parts, right? The parts are like right in your face. Like you study like anatomy and you study physiology, and it's all like right here. And it wasn't until I kind of took a step back after college where I realized like all those things actually work together to create movement and to create harmony in movement. And that's what really my kind of like journey really towards like healthy exercise really kind of started, because it kind of all sort of came together. And I was like, okay, these body parts weren't made to function individually like I was taught that they were. They actually all work together, right? Like the 8 dimensions of wellness. All of our skeletal system works with our muscular system, which works with our neuromuscular system, which works with our fascial system. All those layers sort of harmonize together to create, this movement. So, my journey into fitness went from, an extreme to like, how can I, really tap into how my body was created to improve it, so it's really all about like creating better movement than it was about creating big muscles, right? And often I think that's sort of like where we all start, right? We have this physical goal. We want to look better, and but I think you can certainly do both of those things together. So to me, you're just tapping into a much stronger engine. When you think about all of those things together, you're going to be a much stronger individual, right? Like just like for your example, when you think about the 8 dimensions of wellness versus just the one, you're going to be a stronger individual as a whole. When we think about our body and all its systems working together to create this physical wellness, we're going to be a lot stronger at the end of the day. We're going to have a lot more horsepower to do the things that we want to do, whether that's play with your grandkids or whether that's, just, expressing yourself in the gym to reduce stress, to stay healthy, whatever those goals are. It'll definitely align better. You'll have more capacity to do that.
One of my favorite things about this dimension is the personal touch it has. Everyone's personal journey is different. It's just interesting hearing yours and how you got started and where you ultimately, ended up. And it's interesting too, how different physical wellness can look for everyone. You mentioned, about the grandparent being able to kneel down and give their grandchild a hug versus the CrossFit athlete, participating in the CrossFit games. You'd look at those two situations and be like, well, they're totally different. But in some ways, the goal for the grandparent may even be more so, so being physically well throughout your entire lifespan is obviously immensely important. So last question, and I kind of glossed over it there. I'll probably actually fix this in post, but for you, George, so now with as busy as your life is, how do you make time to balance your own physical wellness? And what does that look like for you, like on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. first and foremost, you gotta find your why, right? You think you kind of started there, right? You've got to find why it's important to you, right? Because without any sort of intrinsic drive to do it, like you're not going to do it, right? Even if I told you like all you need is 10 minutes a day, to engage in sort of some movement health, right? You're not going to do it unless there's like that intrinsic why. So find out what it is, right? And the beauty of it is exercise and movement is good for everything, right? So whether it's a disease you're working through or you don't want to work through, from a prevention standpoint, cancer prevention, whether it's you do want to be active with your grandkids, you want to be able to get up and down off the ground, you don't want to be, a statistic from a broken hip. You just got to tap into your why, right? And for me, my why is probably a little bit different than others. Somebody who works in this profession, my professors were always like, you guys are just weird animals. And there's a lot of truth to that, right? Because I don't have to always like get up and want to do it. I just sort of do because it's a hobby of mine personally. Like I engage in it because it's just sort of fun, right? Some people like to build models, right? Where I just like to be creative and explore movement. That's sort of my fun. But I also have, I have 5 kids, I have a wife, I want to live long and I want to be able to be engaged with them and I want to be able to coach sports with them. Like, we're just coming off the Thanksgiving Day season where I was, my 2 younger boys, I've got a 12-year-old and a 8-year-old boy that, our church does a turkey bowl. So we were out there playing football for an hour, and he was like, I want to do this every year. Right. So I want to be able to do that and engage in that with them. And, I don't want to be like so sore I can't move for 2 months afterwards. So I definitely have other goals other than just like, wanting to be well. I see my mom and dad both struggled with obesity. My mom had like a gastric bypass surgery. My dad, magically lost about 180 pounds on his own through exercise. So he lost basically me in exercise. My sister, both my sisters struggled. One of them is again having a healthy lifestyle. One of them had surgery. So I kind of like see that as like a family background, and I don't want that to happen. I don't want to have to struggle with those things. So I definitely found my why. So you've got to find that, and then once you have your why, like you make time for what's important to you, right? The number one excuse for not exercising is I don't have time. But it's just really you don't have a why. You don't have anything to connect you to it. And then it's just a matter of figuring it out, right? Finding out how much time you do have. Again, that's where we often blow it in the New Year's resolutions, right? I want to go to the gym every day and I want to exercise for an hour again, because that's what the world tells us, right? The pendulum's way over here. We have to know where the pendulum is, right? You don't have to do that, right? Find what works for you, right? Is it 10 minutes a day? Is it 15 minutes? You find what works for you, you make time for it, and then you start to see and feel the benefits of it in all your other dimensions, right? Certainly this year of all years, like emotional health and physical wellness are really tied very closely together. And we're really seeing that. And our industry is really trying to shout that from the rooftops, right? Everybody's struggling emotionally right now. Like exercise will help you deal with those things. So find your why and then find time for it. For me, it's getting up first thing in the morning, and taking care of it before the kids even get out of bed, right? I try to like save a little bit so that they can see, nothing, makes my heart happier than to see my 4-year-old come down the steps and do some ladder drills because the ladder's out, or jump over some hurdles because the hurdles are sitting there, and, pulling on some bands, just, doing what dad does. So it's kind of a cool thing to see, but I want them to see me doing that too. So I don't want to like totally leave it in the morning when they don't realize what I'm doing. So it's nice that they get to see that this is important and why. So that's a long answer to your question, but hopefully that captured a little bit what you're looking for.
No, that's a great answer. And that's awesome. Having your kiddos kind of coming down the stairs to see dad working out. And I've seen some of your workouts, so I can only imagine exactly what they're seeing. Probably like his dad beating up the wall, or is he working out? What's going on here? So, but that is really cool, man. It's cool that you find that balance and that you find that why. In some of our other episodes, and I'm thinking about spiritual wellness, we talked about finding your why with regards to, your purpose for basically living, you know. And one of the things we talked about there is Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist, once said, a man with a why can live with almost any how. And I think when you think about finding your why and how it pushes you, it'd be easy to hit that snooze button, right? It'd be easy to say, hey, I'm going to sleep in today. It's cold. But, you know, trying to set that good example for your kids and trying to set that good example, you know, being the director of the wellness center, right? Being a leader. One of the first things that I admired about your leadership was how you led from the front and from example. I didn't have to listen to the things that you were saying as much as I could see the things that you were doing. And that really spoke volumes. So I think being able to prioritize that and saying, hey, I'm going to carve out time. If I can carve out time for 2 episodes of Netflix, I can carve out time to take care of my health, right? Because like you mentioned, it's so important. If we don't make time to be healthy, well, we should probably make time to be sick, because that is inevitable.
Yeah.
I guess my final question for you, George, we were talking a lot about fitness and physical wellness and what we get right, what we get wrong, how to fix that. If you were thinking specifically for the first group, I want you to think of is just for a group of people, how should they get started? What is that first step? And then I want you to think what that could look like for the youth. Okay. So you kind of 2 different categories there.
Yeah. So obviously if you find yourself, and I think all of these dimensions, you'd said it earlier, like we're always on a journey, right? We're somewhere along the path. And sometimes we're going to fall off the path and we just want to keep plowing forward. Right. But if you find yourself more like, you know, I don't know what to do, I don't know where to start, you know, sometimes the best thing you can do is just, you know, invest a little bit of money towards that, right? Find somebody in your area who, you know, and interview them, right? You know, there's no reason like you just have to pick a trainer or pick a gym, right? Interview who you're going to talk to, find out if like they have the same, how they think about exercise, right? Are they more over here with the quantity, or are they kind of in the middle with like, hey, I want you to do lots of things with a real good quality movement? I would say most of them are going to probably sit right here, or are they all the way over here where it's just all about, you know, doing things quality with, you know, without the quantity thing. So find out what lines up to you, get some advice from those health professionals that are going to look at you as an individual, and they're going to take all of those other dimensions of you into account as they're planning your exercise routine, right? Like, I don't want to take somebody like that's like super stressed out at work and in life and like have them engage in like an hour of high intensity exercise, right? That you're adding stress to stress, and that's not a good recipe, right? But I might give them a little of the good stuff to kind of help offset some of that stress, but I don't want to add too much to that, right? So I think the best thing you could do is just invest a little bit and learn from a professional who does this, right? And for some reason, I think because there's so much out there like YouTube and social media where you can find exercise, but that's not personalized. Has nothing to do with about you. So we end up sort of like cookie cuttering this stuff and not making it personal for ourselves and where we are. And I think we invest so much other of our resources towards things that we care about. Like, you know, think about money we're spending in medicine, right? Well, if exercise can get you off that medicine, like, you know, why not invest a little bit towards that? So I think your best bet would be to seek out a professional and get some advice, right? You may not need to meet with them like constantly, but definitely utilize them to help sort of guide you on the path and figure out what is the right things for you to be doing right now. And then kind of grow from there. If you didn't want to do that, you know, I kind of preach to everybody about like, hey, like these are, you know your basic movement patterns and accomplish those, right? If you don't know what those are, again, you know, more reason for you to kind of seek out that professional help in doing that. Now for the youth, I think the answer is probably simpler than we give it credit for, right? Because again, youth sports and youth activity are really no different than where we find ourselves as adults, right? Because we're quantity, right? And that's how we parent. Sometimes we bring our misunderstanding of things to our children, right? And that usually looks like they're going to be involved in sport, right? And a lot of times that sport is the same movement in the same way over and over again, which can lead to overuse. And we're seeing it sadly, like where kids are getting hurt. Like young children are suffering from like Tommy John surgery and things like that, right? That should never, ever, ever be a part, right? But it's because we thought like, well, we want our kids to be active, so why not have them like throwing a baseball as hard as they possibly can all year round, right? That's just not the best idea. So the why I think it's simple is just like play. Get the kids to play, right? Get the kids to have fun, right? Kids naturally, we're born to move, right? That's why we don't just stay in the crib. We roll around, we seek to explore areas. Like we naturally gravitate towards movement and exploring and playing. Let them play. You know, have them involved in sports. I'm not saying that at all. I love being involved in sport, but have them involved in a lot of sports, exploring lots of different movement, and then take seasons off where they just get to play outside and use their imaginations and be creative and make up their own games. You know, I think that sort of like allows the natural exploration of the human body to just explore and learn about movement, right? And then again, you probably create a much better athlete on the other side of that, right? I don't think we really need to be overly concerned with getting our kids locked into a sport until like later in high school towards college, right? Where you're thinking about scholarships and things like that. I think we often look at the exception to the rule, like the Tiger Woods or the LeBron James, who played that sport their entire life and never did anything but pick up a golf club or a basketball. But those are the exceptions. Those are like the rare exceptions to that, where really if you look at most really good athletes, they were probably engaged in 2 or 3 sports in high school, right? They're multi-sport, multiple movers, and they have some genetic gifting, which is always helpful. But I think just for kids, it's about play. For adults, it's about finding, seeking out professional help and finding what can work for you and what amount of dose that you can have with that.
I think that's great advice. I think that calls right back to prioritizing, hey, if I'm going to invest, not just my money, it doesn't, I'm going to invest my time and my energy. We're so quick to invest our time and energy into social media or TV or whatever, versus, hey, I'm going to take this time and talk to a professional who, hey, George Reid has done this for 20 years. And I just read about this on YouTube in 6 minutes. Maybe he knows what he's talking about. So I think it's a great point to bring up, to at least speak to a professional, gauge their expertise and find that match. And for kids, I think you're exactly right. One of the things we always, again, try to talk about is being simple and calling to that simplicity. And I think by allowing the kiddos to cultivate their physical wellness, like you said, in an unstructured way, not only are you building physical wellness, but you're building, that other multifaceted approach towards health. And again, I think you did a great job of highlighting how adults have that responsibility. And as you have picked up that mantle of responsibility to model that behavior for our kids and our youth, so that health and wellness is a priority and that they know their physical wellness should be prioritized just the same as anything else. So, George, I really, really appreciate you taking time to come down here and talk to us a little bit about this, to explain why physical wellness is so important. It's one of those things that gets talked about, over and over again. But like you said, we can talk about, hey, it's important, you should do it. But until you really realize your why and experience it, I think it's hard to know just how important it is. And once it's gone, I think then you can really realize just how large of a role it plays in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it, Ryan.
Well, thank you. And thanks for all of your insight. I would like to definitely encourage everyone, if you've enjoyed what you've heard here today, to check out our Facebook, our Twitter, our Instagram, check out our website, nwprevention.org. We also have season 1 of our podcast posted. And we definitely invite you to come back in and check out some more of our upcoming episodes. George, I didn't know if you wanted to do any sort of shout out or if you were allowed to.
Well, I mean, obviously, if you my mindset, my mentality is something that we do share with our staff of trainers like Ryan. So obviously rmhwellnesscenter.com is our website if you want to learn more about our website, or if you want to seek our training. You don't have to even be a member of our facility to get some advice, get some counseling. I think now exercising at home is more popular than it's ever been. You do lose that community a little bit. But you may be getting that elsewhere, right? You may take your physicality and you may be walking with others. But if you wanted to seek out that advice, you're certainly more than welcome to check us out. There's a lot of great professionals in our community. So, but yeah, that's where I'm from, and that's where I know the stuff that's coming out of there a little bit more intimately, and so check us out if you'd like.
Yeah, and I will say, as a member, it's a great place to be. They're always updating, always making good stuff happen. And besides, you get to have great conversations with the wonderful director. So what else could you ask for, right? So again, hey, thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in. Thanks, George, so much for joining us. And I hope you guys come back and tune in for more positive vibes from the Valley. I'm your host, Ryan. Thanks.